Hello everyone. I welcome you all to the Rohida Conversation's 7th episode. Today we have with us Dr. Mukesh Kumar, who is a senior fellow at Swiss National Science Foundation and lecturer at the Asian and Orient Institute, University of Zurich. He is the author of Between Muslim Peer and Hindu Saint, published by Cambridge University Press in 2024. Today, Dr. Kumar discusses the increasing primacy of religion in identity, its history, and impact on contemporary India.
So the broad question that we start with is that how does this whole idea of, when the Babri happened in 92, there is a realization among the intellectual and political elite that the idea of secularism they are adhering to the quote-unquote Western idea, we can deconstruct that later, is not working. So a lot of them want to go back to the roots. What is the indigenous form of secularism? And a lot of them turn to Kabir in North India particularly. And then there are a lot of figure in history, we look back in poetry, especially in the Sufi or Bhakti traditions, that people, they spoke of inclusivity, and we would like to call a lot of them as a syncretic tradition in today's terminology. But in the past there was something. So not going into this whole nitty-gritty of what was there. What is your reading of this whole idea of going back to the roots to find this idea of communal harmony, inclusivity or plurality in the sense?
No, that's a great question. So I would actually begin with commenting on the whole idea of secularism first, because the way we understand secularism. So there has been a very sort of dominant understanding among Indian scholars that there is a distinctive form of Indian secularism which is different from Western secularism. And that is premised on sort of maintaining equal distance from all religions. So a state wouldn't have one official religion. A state would actually protect or promote all religions equally, whether it is Hinduism, Islam, Christianity. The problem with sort of giving an emphasis entirely on secularism to counter sort of the changing political situations and violence associated with it, it's a very limiting sort of analysis, because violence is always in part of Indian society, history and culture, and obviously the mobilization against community and people and groups and the form of violence was actually very much different. Just to give you one example, that caste violence never stopped. So the thing is that, caste violence, violence against Dalits, violence against women, violence against tribal groups have always existed. But what kind of violence gets priority or talked about a lot is sort of the same Hindu-Muslim violence that get discussed a lot over other forms of violence. And why is it so? The problem actually lies within this discourse of from the both sides, that on the left side, on the right side. So for me, Indian left and Indian right, they play a very complementary role, in the sense that deciding sort of certain matters to talk about and not talk about. And it reminds me of what Abdul Razzaq Gurnah said about post-coloniality, because again, the discourse of secularism and anything that happens in India somehow always ends up being related to what happened during the colonial period. And Abdul Razzaq Gurnah said one thing, that within post-colonial societies there are multiple positionalities, and which position becomes hegemonic and acquires a very dominant form is a matter of representation and power. And for me it evokes a very interesting point, that why religion has acquired, or the discussion around religion, whether it's sort of violence between Hindus and Muslims and violence between, has acquired a very hegemonic status over other forms of violence, particularly sort of violence against Dalit. And it is again related to sort of Bourdieu idea of social capital, because any kind of knowledge, that has the ramifications. The moment we speak words, the moment we actually put words on paper, words have impact, words have power, because they not only generate discourses and provide information, but also they have sort of everyday sociological sort of existence. and within that discourse, what happens that certain ideas get more priority. And for me, I think the whole discussion on secularism to counter this sort of anti-minority violence is very limiting in nature. So there's a very fine book called Composing Violence, which has been recently published by Moyuk Mukherjee from Duke University Press. And what he does that he explains is very clearly that violence and the legality for representation in police archive gives us an idea to think about how states have been constituted, in the sense that how violence doesn't end with sort of ending the violence itself, because it has a long life. And so it brings to your other question, for example, that peacemaking is also a process and violence making is also a process. And in this case, we are particularly talking about how to counter Hindu-Muslim violence, and scholars have evoked this idea that we need to actually go back to indigeneity and roots sort of in Kabir Panthi ideology, other similar ideologies which have actually talked about transcendence of religious boundaries and insignificant nature of socio-religious identities. But the problem with that idea is that any period is not sort of violence free. So what happens that obviously, the Kavi's poetry or Sufi or Bhakti Sen's poetry, they offer a very alternative vision of human life, of social life, of intercommunal relationship, intersocial relationship. And what happens that within that phase, they do talk about sort of not caring about worldly differences and worldly boundaries, and which can offer a very viable alternative to thinking about human life, thinking about interreligious relations, and that can help a bit. But there's also a danger of sort of romanticizing this idea that only Kavi's poetry or Kavi's vision can offer a very viable solution, very well solution this problem, because this form of violence also has palpable effect. People who are in political power, they get appointments, they get sort of elected to parliament. So that means, no matter how many harmonic messages or messages, so nice messages you sort of spread among them, when it comes to about power has a very corrupting nature.
So you kind of, if I get you what you're saying, you say kind of why, because violence breeds power, that's why it exists. It constantly breeds power. I think this is one question I wanted to ask to a lot of people, but I think you are a very particularly very right person that I can ask with this person, which is a broad that I always come through in my research, but I've never been able to answer it. When and how does this idea, because you say there's always violence against, let's say, minority, there is against, and minority we can speak beyond just religion, gender, caste, and a kind of a political association that you have. When and how does a religion become such a primary mode of identity? I mean, all of us have a very, we wear so many hats. What religion, what caste, what gender, region, food, everything. How does religion and when does religion become such a dominating force that it really pushes away all other form of identity for time being, especially in the context you said that communal violence really take a precedence over all other kind of violence?
I can give you a very long explanation, but I'll try to be brief. The question that other people have also written about that before 20th century, caste or sort of religious identity was secondary, or identification with religion was secondary to the identification with caste and sect. So here, sect is a problematic term, but you can call panth, sampradaya, or path or order, whatever actually suits you. So, and religion actually acquired a very hegemonic position, and particularly identification with religion became very, very important in the 20th century. And various people have actually tried to answer this question in different ways. They try to associate the development of this particular form of identification with nationalistic mobilization for independence, religious polarization during independence struggle, as well as the rise of representative form of governance during colonial times again. So all of these things, what they did, I mean, they tried to sort of mobilize people along the line of certain identification, whether it could be religious, social, or other ethnic identification, and that was a major development. So in order to mobilize people on a large number, any ideology, whether it's Marxist ideology or nationalistic ideology or the ideology of Gandhi, they needed bigger categories. So Gandhi tried to mobilize people along the category of peasant. So that means peasant is not a homogeneous category. There are multiple set of groups within a peasant group, big peasants and small peasants. But by using sort of popular metaphors like the idea of Raj, the production of cows, he used broader symbolism, Hindu symbolism, and it ended up sort of giving his fight a very religious character in nature. So I would say that a number of processes which were happening in the past played a very important role in making religion a prominent category among Indians to identify themselves with. And it has to do with also Orientalism, what was happening in the 19th century when British colonial administrators came here. They wanted to understand Indian society and they produced knowledge about sort of caste, tribes, religion, and along the line of socio-ethnic groups. And for their reference, because they were Protestants mainly, English Protestants, and Protestant understanding, belief was the central tenet, and religion was the central tenet to actually categorize people and identify people. So they said that Indians don't have any religion, or Hinduism is actually not a religion. Instead of,
For them, it was very messy.
it was very messy. They couldn't understand it, so they tried to say all sorts of bad things about Hinduism. So indigenous elites actually felt very bad about it. People like Radha Ram Mohan Rai or later on Vivekanand, and they ended up actually making Hinduism a very sort of homogenized religion based on one text, one god, one tradition. So Vedantic philosophy actually came up. They started talking about non-duality and there is no difference between Atma and Paramatma. Or during Gandhi's time, Bhagavad Gita became a very central text. So all of these things actually played a very important role in defining Hinduism. And so it ended up actually impacting people, and people also started to identify more in terms of religious identity rather than the sort of caste and sectarian identities, but it has acquired a very different take after 1990s, because I think the politics of social justice was very important and significant development. In the South, there was a respect movement going on since the time of Peria. So these things were actually talking about giving rights and representation to people from marginalized backgrounds. So in order to counter that, sort of Savarna political as well as sort of academic project ended up sort of making religion as a prominent category of thinking, behaving, as well as understanding in the society. So there's a long genealogy of these discourses. I think why religion acquired very prominent state. And I think also one important role is of which form of Hinduism has acquired a prominent state. And I think it's a Brahminical form of Hinduism. Orthodox, Westernite, Brahminical form of Hinduism has acquired a very prominent state. And the temple building in Ayodhya is actually culmination of that sort of politics, because whether it's Gandhi or whether it's sort of other religious leaders or leaders of Orthodox standing, they have a particular type of religious sensibility, and that religious sensibility worship deity in a physical form, worships deity in a temple. It's a sagun mode of thinking, which is very different from Kabir's Ram. Kabir's Ram didn't have any form, but sort of Gandhi's Ram, or what we can call Narendra Modi's Ram, as a physical form.
So basically, we can understand what you were saying, that there was like 19th century onwards, because for a lot of people, especially British who came from outside, this society was very messy in the sense that they want to classify everything. It was also the age of, like, science.
Yeah.
Everything has to fall in order,
Yes.
make sense. It can't be. So classification was in the air, and people British tried to basically classify. And for them, as you said, that because they follow Protestantism, for them religion was a very important identity. That's the lens. But also there are other kind of aggregators. In today's term,
Yes.
call, there are a lot of aggregation process was happening. So at some point of time, British started it, and there's other people also, like left was trying to mobilize on the, let's say, class
idea.
Like, a lot of social justice groups were trying to mobilize around caste.
Yes.
Hindutva, political Hinduism or Hindutva was trying to formulate around the idea of religion. And all these identity was being under construction.
Yes.
So, over a period of time, these categories got consolidified. And then, as we see today, it is the basically political Hinduism, which is Hindutva, really actually taken the lead among all these categories. When we think of this long history, it's been really encapsulated very interestingly by you. Is there always a fear that, okay, that kind of secularism, the Western idea of secularism, to be away from the religion is not working here? For right or wrong reason, we are not going to debate it here. But is there always as a risk to use this religious, and when I say religious in a very broad term, not very Puranic religion, folk practice, which could be Saguna and Nirguna, in a very broadest possible sense. When I say the use of these religious forms or traditions, they always have a risk of sliding into this dominant form of religiosity, which is Hindutva today. Because what interesting came from my fieldwork, that the people who were associated with Rajasthan Kabir Yatra in 16, which is basically a project of communal harmony, they didn't see any contradiction of themselves being there and being part of Vishwa Hindu Parishad, or really celebrating this present dispensation and the kind of violence they are committing. We see them as a counter, but for them it's the same thing, because it's about religion.
Yes. No, that's a very important point, and I somewhat agree to it. One thing that before I come to this particular point, I want to emphasize two things. A thing is that I don't find any difference between political Hinduism and Hindutva. They're not different at all.
I'm using it as a like.
But I mean, even for that sake, Hinduism and Hindutva are not different at all, because it's a category that has been created artificially by scholars. Because, as you said, just towards your question, towards the end of your question, that people don't find any difference between sort of participating in Kabir Yatra and committing violence. So that means for them it would be making perfect sense, in the sense that both things can actually exist in their life and they can accommodate both views. And in a similar sense, what happens is that Hinduism and Hindutva are very closely related. Again, I have again and again invoked the figure of Gandhi. A lot of right-wing Hindu nationalists, they take inspiration from Gandhi. Gandhi was the one who popularized sort of cow protection movement. So whether you will call Gandhi as a figure who actually promoted Hindutva, or he was a deeply religious person. So again, what Ambedkar said about is that the Hindus practice caste, or upper caste Hindus commit violence against Dalits. It's not because they are bad human beings. It's because they are deeply religious. It's because what is written in their text, right, in Vedas, in Sanskrit scriptures. So when you are deriving inspiration from certain form of traditions that is inherently sort of anti-minority or anti-lower caste people, so that means the seed is just there.
So if we can say the violence is a rule, not an exception. It is not you treated away from your path of religion. It is exactly you're walking on your path.
Yes,
religion.
Yes. To a certain extent, I would say yes. And again, I mean, I'll go back to your question of secularism, because the way we discuss about sort of there is no difference between Hinduism and Hindutva, no major difference. Again, I mean, everything is a construct. So it could also be sort of a scholarly construct and Brahmanical construct. There's no secularism. Even in the West or in the East, on this planet, there is no secularism. What does it mean by it? For example, I mean, even Western democracies, which try to promote secularism, and at least, I mean, they have said that there is secularism in Western societies, the role of religion hasn't diminished. And even in states' sort of rituals, religion is very much prominent. When American president or in the Germany and any other country, they follow Christian rituals. So what happens that even if religion is actually targeted since the time of enlightenment, since the time of sort of so-called coming of modernity, and there was separation between religion and science, religion exists in vestigial forms. That means something which is always left behind, no matter how hard you try to actually get rid of it. But having said that, I just want to make one point. What Western societies have successfully done is that religion has become, they've always targeted religion displayed in the public sphere. So they have always said that be as much religious as you want, but it should be a private affair.
So in a lot of ways, if you say that they have actually secularized a lot of religious practices, in a sense.
Yes, to a certain extent, the thing is that religion is still a very strong category of thinking and behaving and analyzing and conducting oneself. What happens is that religion has sort of its hold has weakened. For example, a padri is not deciding sort of matters of civic life for you, or not many people are actually conducting baptism. Not many people are registered in the church as sort of religious people. And so in that sense, I mean, religion definitely has weakened in public life in the West. What religion again is actually very prominent among sort of this statist behavior. The people will actually take oath on the Bible, and a state will actually try to finance churches in certain places.
Yeah. So was it also the reason could be a possible, not in all cases, but in some cases, that because Christianity or a certain form of Christianity in a particular nation state or a state in whatever form that existed or exists, it was always a hegemonic power. So, if you have a hegemony, you don't have to kind of, show it.
Yes.
So it's because then it's always already become a norm. So you don't have to actually assert it. On the other hand, in country like, let's particularly we're talking about India, that hegemony in terms of political space was not there. That's why that assertion, that tussle is being being noticed, as you said, like, communal violence is being noticed quite a bit because that hegemony was not there.
Right. I mean, Chris, all religion have political agendas and vice versa. So the thing is that we cannot entirely separate religion from politics and politics from religion because they mutually benefit each other. Political leaders often take sort of advantage of religious sentiments, and so do religious leaders. What is interesting here is that Christianity has, in various forms, whether it's sort of colonialism, Western imperialism, or knowledge project, very closely associated with imperial powers. And the reason is that, again, from a historical point of view, religion always legitimizes the power of rulers. So religion has a very important role to play here because, it's the notion of kingship is very important. And to a certain extent, post-colonial societies or sort of democratic societies have carried on with this idea that someone has to legitimize your rule. So immediately after sort of, even in India, if we look at if I use the word coronation of Narendra Modi, and all the religious leaders were invited in what kind of sort of religious ceremony in which, he took oath like a king. So by doing that, he's trying to mobilize people. By doing that, he's actually trying to mobilize sentiments. And here, I would also say that Hinduism, since it's very diverse, so describing a Hindu may mean different things, right? And often this idea is very contradictory. So just to evoke one idea of Tantra is very anti-hegemony, anti-institutional, antinomian power, but still Tantra derives from a lot of Vedic rituals. And Vedic or Brahminical Hinduism talks about settled lives, household society, performing one's duty and one sort of upholding one's moral order or sort of caste society. But Tantra, on the other hand, actually completely discards. But both traditions interact with each other in a very complex manner. But they're serving to a certain extent, more or less, this religious idea of how you call it, sort of harnessing power, right? Harnessing power in different forms, and that power in religion could be harnessed by political leaders as well. And going back to your question, I would say that there are several instances that once power becomes absolute, then people may not need religion in the same form, or they may require a different religion. So the use of religion may change for a political leader. For example, Ashoka. So what Ashoka did, that Ashoka sort of organized various campaigns against other kings, and there are several instances. A lot of people got killed, especially during the Kalinga War. It has been recorded that more than 100,000 people lost their lives. And once his expansion of his political boundaries of his state was complete, he became a non-violent figure. He started practicing Buddhism. So the thing is that how a particular concept of kingship can use different kinds of religion to benefit its rule as well as to maintain the status quo, because now everything is achieved. He has emerged as a victorious figure, and there is no possibility of expanding a frontier or his political boundary anywhere else. So let's prioritize a religion which has sort of this appeal for maintaining peace, because after all, he also has to run a kingdom.
Yeah.
But religion never diminishes from public life, political life, or sort of from political sphere.
Yeah, it's basically you invisibilize or institutionalize violence in a way that it's like, in the what Foucault also writes, like, it will not be part of public culture, it is part of institution.
Yes.
So there will be a kind of a civility which will be practiced, but
Absolutely.
but the violence will upset. I want to draw 4 figure because this conversation is getting really interesting. So 4 figure, Savarkar, Gandhi, Ambedkar and Periyar. Savarkar was actually looking at this whole idea of Hindutva, and in his own lifetime, he was a very marginal figure in history. But what we see today is coming of genealogically of the most powerful figure. We think of Gandhi, like we look at Gandhi, so like basically very inclusive, whatever inclusive or exclusive, he was for that Hinduism is the way forward. Ambedkar saw that Hinduism is irreparable, the only way, end of life. He said, he agreed that you cannot navigate this society without religion, you need religion. So the Ambedkar thought the Buddhism is a better option. And then Periyar, he was like social justice, a theist. So these are 4 lines, right? And Periyar, interestingly, still the ideology of Periyar still is a very deep root in Tamil Nadu. I mean, we can debate. Gandhi's kind of way always on the margins still. Buddhism actually, Neo-Buddhism, 70s, there's a Dalit Panther movements also. We don't know. I mean, I don't have any data, subjective or objective understanding of that, if it is thriving or not. So, these out of these 4 figures, 3 were actually looking a way forward through a religion, a form of religion. And the other was looking at atheism. So, I mean, and all of them exist in a way. So, my question would be that Ambedkar, as I think it's been very often quoted thing in the whole question of a political democracy and a social democracy, that he said with the implementation of constitution, political democracy is at place, a one man, one vote, but social democracy is a far, far long process. And he kind of implied that if you don't have a social democracy, over a period of time, the political democracy will also erode, which we kind of in a different form we see today. So this whole idea of kingship versus a democratic, is this still that the people are still looking themselves as a subject, not as a citizen? Because the transition is because political power, governance, all these big things. But all, for me, it's important what's happening on the ground. Are people seeing themselves as citizens in the form that the idea of citizenship was formed?
I mean, they do to in a certain extent, but also what happens that political practices, I'm not a political scientist, but from my limited understanding of politics and political processes, I'm trying to answer this question. So what happens that, particularly in Punjab, there is a lot of patronage politics. So what happens that big landlords, they will considerable power, and what they do is that, I mean, they patronize landless colleagues that will get your work done if you vote for us, and what happens that it ends up becoming a kind of very feudal system where everyone has political loyalties. Either you vote for me or the other person, other jamidar, other landlord. So in that sense, I would say that people don't really see themselves as citizen, but they have a very vague idea of what is the meaning of a citizen and what is because the state claims to be a welfare state, that it will provide you education, health, and other forms of civil services. And but people who get power through political processes and democratic processes, they have been old elites, and this is the case more or less everywhere in India, because there are very few families or very few sort of social magnates, either because of sort of they have emerged through political movements or they have been traditionally very powerful. They have this patronage system that there would be sort of local level mafia or gunda or people who have muscle power or money power. They will actually mobilize people for us, for our political parties, and that's how we can actually acquire votes of people. But one big thing that has happened since the election of Modi is that regardless of various sort of so many different types of differences between sort of different political ideology of Modi and other people, BJP is still a very democratic party, and it has actually shown many examples, given many examples of choosing people as political heads who have sort of come from very sort of marginalized and poor background. And by doing that, they're actually learning from the methods of Indian left and other people that if in order to make this democracy look truly democratic, we need to actually give representation to people who belong to sort of a plethora of socio-economic groups. So, but that does not mean that, again, people have this very clear understanding of that BJP is running a very sort of democratic or clean government or a state which is actually a welfare state. Because again, we will see that there are people across political parties and who have been actually either generationally been in politics, or they've switched sides and they have some sort of political background who are mobilizing these people. So I would say that I'm not trying to diminish the agency of people that don't have the capacity of thinking. They can't think of sort of properly about their welfare or about their politics. People are very smart.
And I think this is very important point. I think people were always smart, even when they were subject. I mean, Nandita Sai's work basically deals with the idea of how in this royal family and these riyasats, they basically artisans or the people used to basically negotiate. So people always had power. I mean, this is a different matter how much they would be able to exercise, assert. That's a totally a very complex topic. Thinking about this whole idea of patronage system, now this lot of these patronage system are breaking down, and as you said, there is new systems coming. So we are in a situation, and that's maybe it looks like it's all chaos because the old is dying and the new is yet to born. Like, in this whole idea of chaos, do you think that the new kind of patronage which is coming, it is much more centralized? Like, because if we've seen in last 10 years that this whole idea of old leader is something going away because old leader has been sidelined. New leader who comes before they get old, they are also being disposed of. Like you will get some big celebrity or big leader from other party. They will given a ticket to fight election. After one term, they'll be just displaced. So do you think they are in a way? Let's not get into this. It's a good or bad for democracy. They are resisting this idea of someone being in power for too long so that they have a vested interest. Stakes. It's more like, what in bureaucracy, they say they don't give a homestay to a lot of these bureaucrats, IAS officer, because they will, build some kind of vested interest in that state. Is this a kind of governance that they're coming where there's a lot of power to bureaucrats and people who are not grassroots connected? Is it going to give a very centralized form of a singular, or not singular, but very few people having a role of a patron, and then this whole piece of land with millions of people being just having such a distance from their patrons? Because patronage is also one thing that when your patron is not close to you, you can't physically, tangibly see them, interact with them. What kind of patronage that we are looking forward now? That let's imagine that, okay, there's a very centralized ideology and there's a power and there are people. And there's very few people in between who doesn't matter much in that role because there are anytime they're displaceable.
I think it has to do with political culture of the time. So I think political culture right now is premised on this idea of centralization. So whether sort of Modi or Visa, their modus operandi is actually is premised on controlling power and centralizing power in their hands, as well as sort of creating a pool of loyal leaders who are very, very loyal to them. So that means there is no sort of resurgence.
And those leaders have nothing much of their own also, so that they get raised hell at some point of time.
Yes. And I feel that, as you said, that the old leaders who have switched political loyalties or joined BJP and they were earlier associated with Congress and other political parties, they are also easily disposed of because, again, it's very much sort of part and parcel of how these people function. Because for them, power is very important, and in order to get that power, if they feel that there is anti-incumbency, if they feel that this person is not going to win, they won't hesitate from getting rid of the person. And it happens in MP. It happened in MP and also happened in Haryana recently.
Rajasthan and Chhattisgarh.
Other states as well. So new leaders were actually introduced, and new leaders were also introduced. So interesting thing here is that what I feel about this whole idea of centralizing various wings of or various, because power is dispersed at all levels, and India is such a big country that no one can single-handedly centralize power in one hand. They need support of certain kind of system, whether it's sort of bureaucratic system or their own political system or system of political parties. So you need some sort of support to govern the country effectively.
There are two things. I mean, and a lot of people talk about them in a very different breath, but I think I want to bring them together. Yes, there's a whole idea about this political power, especially at the moment, Prime Minister Modi, who's kind of a cult figure, personality cult on one hand, a lot of people say. On the other hand, a lot of people also say they are building a structure which is like this, which will last beyond any individual.
Yes.
Because these are two very contradictory things, and they looks like they're able to do both. Railing around the cult and then building a structure, a party mechanism, or a organizational strength. So they're actually working on both, which is a very, very interesting combination.
There's actually two things. Political success doesn't necessarily mean the introduction of a new kind of political culture.
Yeah.
So political success is one thing, getting power is one thing, and political culture is another. What I'm trying to say here is that you may be electorally very successful person, but that does not mean that everyone likes you.
Yeah.
Right. So even in terms of numbers, if we look at the total number of votes which were actually polled to Mr. Modi in 2019 and 2014 parliamentary elections, it was around 32% and around 41%. So it's still close to 60% people didn't vote for him. So here I would like to actually, India is such a diverse country that there are different types of disagreements. And those disagreements could become sort of very sensitive subject for so many people, whether it could be on linguistic grounds, whether it could be on religious ground, whether it could be on sort of this north-south divide. So there are so many markers. Caste is another big factor, because Ashish Nandi said that he always kind of thought that caste will take care of Hindutva, because Indian society is segmented along caste lines. So I never thought that the project of Hindutva will ever be actually successful, but it has ended up becoming successful, not because of people voted along religious lines. For me, the important thing is that there was rise of newer types of subordinate castes, or castes which were not sort of mainstream politically or socially. The rise of lower OBC, the rise of, let's say, this anti-dominant caste politics in a particular state. In Maharashtra, the rise of sort of, in Amit Shah's politics of anti-Maratha. In UP Bihar, anti-Yadav's politics. In Haryana, anti-Jat's politics. So that also played a very important role. But again, I mean, these things are not talked about a lot because it doesn't fit the model of right or the left, because left is very much interested in sort of this discourse around Hindu and Muslim or poverty or mega categories, but not along these lines. But these categories are not insignificant. They're still very, very
They exist if you like it or not.
Whether you like it or not, they are going to exist. And for me, interesting development is that if we look at the composition of parliament right now, if you look at political representation, it has brought in much more diversity. So it's not a failed sort of setup, political setup. If you look at sort of, it depends on how you actually look at these processes. If you're going to look at from the perspective of, let's say, Congress and left, it will appear as if that sort of all the institutions have been hijacked. But if you look at socially, then it has been a much more effective,
Inclusive.
inclusive, I would say, because I was just talking to Brahm Vikas, and he was also saying the same thing, that JNU has become more inclusive a more inclusive space compared to the past, and that has happened when the so-called left liberal discourse in India for a very long time projected that JNU is a very progressive place. And what does it mean? Progressiveness for them is sort of prioritizing a particular type of discourse and not necessarily promoting diversity. I have nothing against Indian left. I mean, I have nothing against sort of left is a very beautiful ideology. But what Indian left presents is that it's a very distorted form of global Marxism. Very distorted form, which is actually, according to my opinion, cut off from the reality of Indian society. And there are so many examples that I can give. One example is, but I mean, Indian left is very diverse left. It's fine. So Indian left is very diverse left. When you talk about Indian left, then you need to explain that what left are you talking about. Whether you're talking about sort of Marxist-Leninist, whose policies have been very, very progressive because they fought against landlordism in Bihar and Jharkhand and other places, and they have been a very successful set of political alternatives, very, very successful. But again, the Indian left that developed in Bengal and Kerala have been very Samanda dominated. So if there would be 4 Bengalis, someone was the one said that if there would be 4 Bengalis, there would be 4 political parties and all of them would be left. And there will be very minor differences.
Yeah.
So I think, again, these issues are very complex and very big.
Yeah. So bringing back the whole discussion, wrapping it back, the whole idea, what my interest is this whole idea of Vaishnavism and Shaivism. This is a huge debate and there's a long history. Do you think there's nothing permanent? If we can say politically, democratically, spiritually, religiously,
Yes.
there's nothing permanent. Do you see for time being that a decision is being made?
This in what
Both Vaishnavism and Shaivism.
I won't say it actually because religious life has independent existence from political life. So in that sense, Indian society, American society is very much very, very similar in this.
But so a lot of my questions is, apology, that's a lot of time question I'm being framing in the form of binary because this the audience would be
No, I get it. Yes, definitely. So here, again, I would try to emphasize that what people do and believe and derive meaning out of their actions. Religion is actually one way of looking at the world, which means actually it's a meaning-making tool. So through religious perspective, people try to make sense of their life, try to make sense of the cosmos, try to make sense of every existential question that comes before them, and which is not different from, let's say, scientific perspective, because science also offers a perspective of looking at the world from let's say mathematical perspective or from the perspective of physics and astrophysics. And sometimes these processes could be actually very complementary in the sense that they could offer you a hermeneutic tool to think about human questions, to think about questions of survival, global warming, environmental questions. So not necessarily I'm trying to create this sort of division. And the same is true for how politics uses religion, because politics can use religion, but it cannot entirely determine. It does determine the belief system of people, influence their behavior, religious and ritual behavior, but it cannot limit their sort of the nature of the religious practice, because it keeps changing with time, it evolves, it acquires many different forms, as long as it makes sense to people. So, but there's always a danger of persecution if a particular form of religious practice doesn't fit with the agenda of a political state. So that means there's a danger of targeting that particular religious culture. And that has to do with, let's say, Dalit religions. Like, I can give you many examples. Like, so right now I'm working on Sri Narayan Guru and Vedanta philosophy, and he was a low caste figure body to Azhava community, and many Bilwa leaders and Bilwa community derived inspiration from his philosophy. And despite being a Advaita philosopher, his tableau was removed from the
26th January.
The 26th January parade of the Karnataka state. Why? Because he offered a critique of hegemonic Hinduism, temple-going Hindu religion, which did not fit into the criteria of what Hinduism means presently. And people who actually acquire a very dominant sort of voice in contemporary political situation. And by saying that, I would say they are mostly Brahmins. So their form of Hinduism is actually very neat, temple-going Hinduism, which reinforces their intermediary role in this world. And just to quote one of my friends said that religion has served or helped governments to acquire political power in India for the very first time in Indian history. They have become kings. They have become rulers. They have never been rulers. And they could do it precisely because the way they used religion in Hinduism.
You spoke about persecution. So there's a lot of academic work has been coming out around the idea of cultural justice. I would use a term called cultural persecution, like especially working in Mewat, right? So what kind of cultural practices you think when in this kind of violence, okay, there's a very indirect form of violence. What kind of cultural persecution looks like? Like, okay, from a very distance, if you say the Mayo Muslims, they used to, or they kind of still, some of them practice, they sing Ramayana, right? If I do Mewati Jogis. So what does this kind of idea of cultural persecution looks like? Because then, a lot of these are caste-bound professions. They're doing for generation, and it has its own set of issues. I'm not feeling with that. But what does it feel like you're doing something for generation and you have a spiritual or social connection, cultural connection with those practices, and suddenly one day you wake up and then not kind of allowed, not in a direct but lot of indirect way, not allowed to practice that. You don't find that kind of cultural ecosystem that you practice that.
I think, in general, the world has changed a lot. So if we talk about compartmentalization of religion or culture, it has acquired a very monolithic understanding in popular culture and popular practices, and it has happened on both sides. If we talk about Hindu and Muslims, on the Muslim side, a lot of these sort of quote and unquote syncretic practices have been criticized by the activists of Tablighi Jamaat precisely because they consider them as deviation from Islam, through Islam.
But in a way, Islam as an Abrahamic religion was very organized, institutionalized religion. I know, I agree that there has been a very different variety of Islam, especially practiced in South Asia.
Yes, what type of Islam are we talking about? So there are many Islams. So I'm not trying to actually privilege this idea that a textual Islam is actually the authentic version of Islam, because I'm no one to actually give that verdict. But what people has been doing and practicing since times, so since ages, so that Islam, as you said, Indian Islam is very different from Islams from South, from Indonesia, from the Arab world. So in that sense, I think, the hegemonic understanding of both religions have certain elites, political and religious elites, who have been vocal supporter of only one particular strand of religion. And that particular strand of religion, whether it's sort of Brahminism and Hindus, or clergies of Ashrafs among Muslims, they have been able to actually project their own distinctive version of religions over a plethora of religious and social practices. And that has a very powerful impact upon everyday popular cultural practices or religious practices. In Mewat, the attempt of homogenizing Muslims' practices had been going on for a very long time, since the time of 1920s. And Tablighi Jamaat was actually founded in the Mewat region. So its headquarters is right now in Banglewala Masjid in Nizamuddin, but the whole movement started in Mewat because they thought that they're not proper Muslims. And they're Muslims so they gave the slogan that all Muslims become Muslims. And in Mewat particularly, since all the Muslims, including Mayo Muslims and Muslim Yogis, they were engaged in this distinctive Indic form of socio-religious practices, where they didn't have a very strong sense of their religious self. So, and it has nothing to do with, I think, that they were unconscious cultural choices. I think it has very important connections with the rise of idea of the private property on land, or about which I'm talking talk in my book, that Muse Muslim self was formed much earlier in 12th century and 13th century. And it was an influence of Sufi saints. But with time, they also inculcated their association with Hinduism, particularly sort of Hindu figures like Ram, Krishna, Arjuna, warrior figures who were kings, who were benevolent, and they had actually ruled this area. And they did it precisely because when the idea of private property emerged on land, Islam could not actually signify or legitimize the cultural claim. So that means if you have association with these figures, then you could advance this claim that we have been generously living here, and this is sort of this land belongs to us. And Muslim yogis and mirasis, they were singing folk tales and folk stories, including Jogiyar Mahabharata and the Ramayana, Lanka ki Chadai, which is colloquially called, for a very long time, precisely because it was the requirement of the Muslim muse to advance that claim, cultural claim. So culture has a very distinct role to play in everyday life, including not only meaning-making realities, but also at the same time certain practical claims like forming genealogies. And genealogy could be very strong evidence to advance claim on land or to advance claim on property, and which gives a very strong sort of legitimacy to their indigeneity.
So from this particular example, you look at, okay, there. So outside world is like, they might be crying, oh, these syncretic practices are going down or society is dividing. From a very opposite side, like let's say if you look at me, Muslim, for them not to be able to exercise or practice this and this form of tradition, which I can use the word called cultural persecution, it affects them materially, right? Yes, it's affect them materially. So what does in this sense counter to it? I'm not using this strong word called assistance. I'm just how do they maneuver this?
Actually, I mean, they are not sort of following these practices anymore because of cultural persecution. It's more because of the form of Islam among them has changed. So they have been actually told by religious clergy in Mewat or Tablighi activists to consider these places, Sufi shrines and Bhakti shrines, as places of haram, where true Islam doesn't exist. So, and that appeal plays a very important and powerful role among many Muslims to let go of these practices. But again, the thing is that, I mean, certain practices are more resilient, and especially if they have to do with caste and marriage. So even though male Muslims discourage their family members to from visiting these shrines, but still, and they marry within their sort of kinship line and pal system. So they have lineage system called pal. So entire Muse or the entire May community has been divided into 13 pals. And many of these pals associate themselves with important Hindu figures like Ram, Krishna, Arjuna, and other figures. And marriages between them is actually determined according to this.
They practice and combination that are allowed.
Yes, and this practice of Beti Lena and Dena. So if certain pals are actually taking brides from particular pals, they will never contradict that practice. They will always take brides from that particular pal and won't give their daughters to that particular pal. So there are also other examples. So I think, I mean, these practices are changing because of a variety of things. And again, from material angle, it is also interesting to look at this because, I mean, these spaces are very important sort of spaces materially where true Islam can be taught. So it's not that they are not sort of claiming ownership on these places. They're very much interested in sort of having ownership on these places. But it's just that sometimes these places become very disputed, like places of Lal Das, and where Hindu Baniyas have been very, very influential and powerful, and they have incorporated those places within Hinduism. But Muslim muse, they are not letting go of these spaces precisely because they're very resourceful. A lot of people come and they offer resources, and also these could be land is a very important commodity.
I think it's a very similar example we saw in Punjab. Mansar is a Sufi shrine and it's been now taken care by Agrawals.
Yes.
So I mean, the form is certainly changing. I mean, in 1920s and 30s, you saw Ramdev also changed form, like in terms of architecture and how does it visually looks from, the transition from shrine to a temple.
Yes. If you're interested in this particular aspect, I will recommend you a book called Antagonistic Tolerance, written by Antagonistic Tolerance and Competitive Theory. So there's a one article which was published in 2002 by Robert M. Hayden, but they also came up with a book in 2013, and the book is called Antagonistic Tolerance. And it's a wonderful example of how spaces are contested, concretized materially, socially, and religiously for a number of reasons across the world.
Yeah, we spoke about this whole idea of how in this particular form of communalism, particularly, how effective or the use of music, particularly this kind of Bhakti Sufi traditional music by a police department, which has a lot more power to do. How do you see it?
I think it's a wonderful initiative if intentions are right, they're in the right place, but police department is also a department which is actually not completely bereft of political influence. So that means, I mean, even though the intentions are very right, I cannot comment on whether they would be successful or not, but music plays a very powerful role. And music has tremendous influence upon people, because sometimes messages which are just spoken in words may not have the same impression or influence the way when it is sung, because music arouses emotions, music arouses actually gives you feelings, and people have sort of traditionally associated themselves with a strong message or messages which contain sort of messages for harmony or social justice and different types of messages, and they have derived meanings from these sort of, particularly if they are actually sung by a particular group or a political activist. So I think music does play a very important role in politically in order to address these questions. And Kabir's poetry is actually the remarkable poetries. He has been a wonderful philosopher. He is not just a philosopher, poet, or singer. And a lot of people actually derive inspiration from the figure of Kabir in various forms. So I think, I mean, it can have a very influential and powerful role.
Like it does inform, it instigate violence also, like
Yes.
see nowadays.
Yes.
The Hindu pop, which is really sprawling.
Definitely. So it's all about generating passion, how you generate passion. Hindutva pop generates passion in religious feeling through set of music. And you can also counter it by using the same tool. I feel so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.